Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
It began innocuously enough, 2 weeks before Kira's 40th birthday celebration. I remember the afternoon light slanting through the windows of our living room, making dust motes dance lazily in the golden haze. Kira was perched on the edge of the velvet couch, her phone in hand, and a faint crease of concentration between her brows. I had my laptop open on the coffee table, spreadsheets and vendor quotes spread across the screen like a mosaic of plans. I was juggling ideas for floral arrangements, template menus from the caterer, and a carefully curated playlist that would morph from mellow acoustic tracks into swelling beats as the night unfolded. It was, at least I thought, a collaborative effort. I looked up when she sighed and set the phone down. "I've narrowed it down to 80 names," she said, scrolling through the digital list on her screen. "But we have to cut it to 60. She tapped a name. "What about Jason Bryant?" Her suggestion hit me like a cold wave. Jace. Her college boyfriend who had broken her heart with a selfish farewell text halfway across the continent. Bryant, her brief high school fling, the one who had scribbled love letters in shaky handwriting at my kitchen table, begging for time he scarcely deserved. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to meet her eyes. I tapped my pen against my notebook, blinking away the sting of old memories. "If they're on the guest list," I said carefully, "I'm not coming." She laughed, the sound light and unconcerned, as though I'd made a joke. "Oh, come on. They're just friends now. Don't be insecure." Her dismissive tone cut sharper than any insult. She leaned back, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I know you're sensitive about their history, but I promise nothing is going to happen." I swallowed the retort that rose to my lips. I wasn't insecure, just exhausted. Exhausted from the silent competitions, the unspoken rivalries woven into the fabric of our marriage. I closed my notebook with a soft snap and leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "It's not insecurity," I said quietly. "It's respect. I deserve to know that I'm a priority." She rolled her eyes. "Everything is a priority to you." I felt a flare of irritation, but I kept my voice steady. "Not everything. Just this." The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Outside, the neighborhood was settling into the lull of early evening, birds returning to trees, the faint rumble of distant traffic. In that quiet, I could almost hear the tension between us pulsing like a separate heartbeat. She stood and strolled to the mantel, where a framed photo of our wedding day rested. She picked it up and studied the image, her in white lace, me in a tailored suit, grinning like two kids who had just discovered an infinite future together. "We've been over this," she said softly, but the softness didn't reach her eyes. "I've moved on. They're part of my past." But my past was my present too, or at least it should have been. I imagined the scenario, the ambient glow of candlelight at the venue, laughter drifting through the air, Kira in her elegant dress, her dress that I had helped pick out, flanked by two men who had once meant more to her than I did. I could see the headline in my mind. Exes reunited at 40th celebration, a story I never wanted to star in. She set the photo back down and faced me, arms crossed. "Look, I want you there. I really do. But if you keep making everything about you, you'll miss out." A pang of sorrow twisted in my chest. I loved her. I had been over backward these past years, planning surprise weekends, packing lunches when she worked late, staying up until dawn sorting through her worries. Love, I had thought, was proving up every day. But it seemed she measured affection in public perceptions and social media mentions, not in the quiet sacrifices that no one applauded. "I'm not doing this for attention." I stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street below. "I'm doing this because I matter to you. We matter." She came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. I felt the weight of her body, the heat of her skin against mine. For a moment, I let myself lean into her, imagining that this was simply a rough patch. But when she spoke, her words carried a finality that rattled me. "Can we drop it?" she whispered, loosening her embrace as if I were slipping through her fingers. "Please." I nodded, though it felt like conceding ground in a war I never wanted to fight. I turned to face her and forced a smile, the kind I imagined people plastered on for the camera. "Okay," I said. "No Jace, no Bryant." Her relief was immediate, almost visible, like the easing of pressure in a too tight grip. She kissed my cheek, slid her arms around me again, and murmured, "Thank you." I kissed her back, lightly, mechanically. My lips met hers, and for a heartbeat, I forgot the unease that had been growing in me like a dark omen. But as soon as her lips fell away, the knot in my stomach tightened anew. That night, I lay awake in bed, tracing the edge of my pillow with my fingertips. I thought of the spreadsheet on my laptop, the vendor negotiations, the crushed velvet linens I had ordered. All symbols of the partnership I believed we shared. Yet here I was, bargaining for a sliver of dignity in the guest list of a party that was supposed to be ours together. I closed my eyes, willing sleep to come, but my mind buzzed with questions I couldn't silence. How did love become a competition? Why did respect require negotiations? And most of all, I asked myself, if the person I married couldn't see me as more than an option, where did that leave us? In the dark, I realized the truth I had been avoiding, that this wasn't just about Jace or Bryant, or any names on a list. It was about my place in her life. And as the minutes ticked by toward midnight, I understood that respecting myself might mean refusing to be on that list at all. Her birthday dawned with bright promise, though I watched it unfold from a distance. I woke to the soft trill of my alarm and reached over for the phone that lay face down on the nightstand. The time read 7:45 a.m. A string of notifications waited, cheerful emojis, event reminders, and a succinct text from Kira, "Can't wait to see you later." That stabbed at me with its casual optimism. I slid out of bed, my joints complaining from yesterday's weightlifting session, and made my way to the kitchen. The apartment felt cavernous, its emptiness echoing with every step as I flicked on the kettle. Boiling water was the only sound in the stillness. I measured out coffee grounds, the routine movements numbing the edge of my thoughts. In the cupboard, I found yesterday's takeout container, leftover chicken stir-fry with peppers and broccoli. It wasn't much, but it was something I could eat without thinking. I reheated it on the stove, the sizzle of sauce against the pan momentarily grounding me in the present. I poured coffee into a chipped mug and carried both to the small dining table by the window, where the morning light filtered through half-closed blinds. I scrolled through my messages as I ate, expecting another from Kira. Instead, my phone buzzed with a notification from her Instagram story. I tapped it and saw her in the venue lobby, champagne flute in hand, confetti swirling in the air. The room was alive with laughter and clinking glasses. Her smile was radiant, so full of life that I felt the hollowness behind my own chest tighten. I dragged my thumb across the screen, watching Jace's easy grin as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, then Bryant's warm whisper, fingers brushing her back. My coffee went cold. No thought of me occurred to them, not a single thought. Not her. Not her friends. Not her exes, despite the familiar flush of intimacy in their laughter. I finished my stir-fry in a few bites, setting the empty container aside, and poured another cup of coffee. The bitter liquid coated my throat, a harsh contrast to the syrupy sweetness I imagined enveloping the party. I wondered if I should text her, congratulate her, say something witty. But my fingers hovered over the keys, and I thought better of it. I couldn't inject my presence into a celebration that thrived on my absence. By midday, the messages had multiplied. A montage of stories showed the cake cutting, tiered in pastel hues, adorned with fresh flowers. The candles flickered as her lips pursed, and she breathed them out in one deliberate breath. Someone shouted, "Make a wish," and she giggled, eyes sparkling. On either side, Jace and Bryant beamed, arms draped around her shoulders. No one asked, "Where's he?" No one sent a second invitation. They didn't hesitate, didn't call, didn't care. The party rolled on like a boat that had left the dock without waiting for its captain. I closed the phone and set it aside, its black screen mocking me. The living room beckoned, sofa cushions plump and inviting. I sank into them, wrapping my arms around myself as if offering a comfort no one else would. My eyes drifted to the framed photos on the wall. Our wedding day, the vacation in Santorini, the silly snapshot of us with matching polka dot raincoats. In each, she smiled at me as if I were her sole confidant, the epicenter of her universe. How quickly those images had become relics, artifacts from a narrative rewritten without my consent. Time drifted onward, and soon the afternoon light waned. My appetite vanished, and I let the cold coffee languish unwatched beside me. In the quiet, I realized I had become an observer of my own life, watching through a pane of glass as my marriage celebrated without me. A gentle ache grew behind my ribs, a cocktail of betrayal and bewilderment. How could something I had poured my heart into feel so disposable? The question hung in the air, unanswered and heavy. I stood and walked to the window, pulling aside the curtain to peer at the street below. A line of taxis peeked around the bend. Women in dresses and men in suits laughed as they emerged from party vans. A breeze stirred the curtains, brushing my cheek with its coolness. For a moment, the scene below looked inviting, friendly faces, shared joy. And then I remembered how the laughter sounded when it stopped being for me. The facade cracked, revealing an emptiness I could no longer ignore. My phone buzzed again, a direct message from Kira. Hope you're not too busy. You know how much I wanted you here. I stared at the text, the punctuation like cold drops falling on my skin. I typed a response, happy birthday. Then I deleted it. I typed again, enjoy. Deleted. Finally, I pressed block on notifications, severing the tiny thread that kept pulling me back. No reply would soothe the wound. No reaction would bridge the chasm. As evening settled, I turned off the lights and lit a single lamp, its warm glow a small island of comfort. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, the silence heavy but honest. There would be no cake, no toasts, no clinking glasses to mark her milestone. There would only be me, in a quiet apartment, eating the remains of a meal I had prepared without her knowledge, savoring the bittersweet taste of my choice. And in that solitude, I understood the truth. Marriage was not defined by shared celebrations, but by the willingness to stand together when no one else did. She had breezed into happiness with her past standing proudly beside her, while I sat alone, unnoticed and unmissed. The realization stung, but beneath it, there was a flicker of relief. I didn't belong there, not on her stage, not in her story. And for the first time in years, I felt the stirrings of freedom. I didn't reply to her final message. I didn't wait up for her call. Instead, I reclined further into the cushions, closed my eyes, and let the steady hum of the city at night be my lullaby. They could have their party. I would start mine tomorrow. Because this birthday, her birthday, became the turning point I didn't know I needed, the moment I stopped celebrating someone else's life at the expense of my own. Word count, approximately 1,007 words. The morning after her birthday party, I woke with a dull ache behind my temples and a lingering taste of regret on my tongue. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of traffic on the street below. My head throbbed, not from the remnants of last night's scotch, though I permitted myself one small glass to steel my nerves, but from the weight of betrayal pressing against my skull. I lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle whirl of the ceiling fan and the soft tick of the clock on the wall, as though willing the room to make sense of the chaos that had become my life. Eventually, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat up, wrapping the thin robe tighter around my shoulders. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent and unflinching. I picked it up and swiped through notifications, reminders for meetings I couldn't cancel, messages from friends asking if I was all right, and a text from Kira, sent at an unholy hour. Last night was magical. Thanks for being so understanding. Smiley face. I stared at it, the smiley face mocking me. I tapped the message once, twice, and then deleted it without reading. Magical was not the word I would use. I slipped the phone back under the pillow and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. The reflection that stared back at me looked foreign. Puffy eyes, unshaven jaw, hair mussed like I'd wrestled with my conscience all night and lost. I ran my fingers through my hair, forcing it back from my forehead, and tried to summon a semblance of composure. In the mirror, I practiced the expression I would wear when she returned. Calm, unbothered, even gracious. She deserved no hint of the storm raging inside me. By the time I reached the kitchen, the kettle was already whistling. I prepared 2 cups of coffee, strong, black, no sugar, and poured them into chipped mugs. I carried one to the guest room where my suitcase lay half-packed and set it on the nightstand. In the dim light, the clothes inside looked like fragments of a life I once knew. I stared for a moment, fingertips brushing the fabric of a shirt I had bought on our honeymoon, a shirt she'd teased me about for its loud floral print. Memories flickered. Our laughter under oaken trees, the hammock that swayed with our shared weight, the careless promise of forever that we had whispered to each other. She walked in then, softly, as though she had rehearsed this moment. The scent of vanilla perfume hung around her, mingled with the faint tang of last night's cologne, definitely not mine. She carried her phone in one hand and a folded dress in the other, the favors from her party perhaps forgotten on the dining table. She paused in the doorway, observing me as if seeing me for the first time in years. Morning, she said, and the word was meant to be warm, but it came out hollow. I held up the mug. Coffee. I offered it without looking at her. She took it and raised an eyebrow when she saw my expression. Rough night? It wasn't mine. I met her gaze, cool and steady. Did you have a good time? She shrugged, slipping into the room. It was interesting. She perched on the edge of the bed, balancing the mug in her palm. Jace apologized for how things ended between us. Bryant was sweet, really sweet. Everyone said it was the best party I've ever had. I stayed silent, letting her spill the details I didn't want. She described a midnight toast, confetti cannons, a surprise performance by a local duo singing our song. She laughed at how Jace's grin had crinkled the corners of his eyes, how Bryant had brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Each anecdote felt like a needle, stitching fresh wounds. When she paused, I set my mug on the nightstand and inhaled. "You don't have to tell me," I said softly. Her eyes narrowed. "I thought you'd want to hear about it." "You thought wrong." I stood and backed away, crossing to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was waking. Neighbors watering plants, joggers tracing familiar loops, males slipping through slots. The world felt normal, stubbornly indifferent to my unraveling. She followed me, folding her arms. "What's wrong with you?" The question was both tender and cruel, a reminder that she still believed there was something to salvage, something she understood or could fix. I closed my eyes, summoning patience I didn't feel. "Nothing," I said, my voice shaking. "Nothing is wrong. Just," I lifted my hand, tracing a line through the air as though erasing invisible scars. "I can't do this anymore." She blinked, confusion pooling in her gaze. "Do what?" "This." I turned to face her, shoulders squared. "This performance. The contests of affection, the guest list games. I'm tired, Kira." Her lips parted, as though she were about to protest, but a ping from her phone interrupted her. She glanced down and frowned. "It's Jace." She watched the message. "You left so soon. Were you okay?" I didn't move. I imagined Jace's fingers hovering over the screen, wondering why she hadn't stayed with him. It struck me then that I wasn't the only one scratched by yesterday. She, too, had glimpsed regret among the glamour, though she'd thrown herself into it as if to outrun the guilt. She sighed and set the phone down. "I wanted you there," she confessed, her voice small. "I know I messed up adding them to the list, but I wanted to see you at the party." The admission hit me like ice. She thought she messed up, as if including 2 exes was a minor oversight, not a declaration of her priorities. I swallowed. "You didn't want me at all," I said. "Not like you wanted Jace or Bryant. If you did, you'd have asked." Tears glistened in her eyes. "I asked," she whispered. "I told you about it. I asked you to come." I shook my head, feeling a chill settle in my chest. "You asked me to come if I didn't make a scene. You asked me to come on your terms. I'm not your accessory, Kira." She flinched, as though struck. "That's not fair." I stepped close, lowering my voice until it was all but a breath. "I'm done competing for scraps of your attention. Done with the whispers behind my back. Done with the jokes you make at my expense because it entertains your friends. I deserve more." For a moment, she seemed about to speak, but then she closed her eyes and nodded, the fight going out of her. "I love you," she said, but it came out uncertain, as though she were testing the words against a truth she no longer believed. I closed my own eyes and reached out to touch her arm, the gesture gentle, not conciliatory. "I love you too," I said, "which is why I'm walking away." Her phone buzzed again, and she looked at it like a lifeline. I let her pick it up, the screen lighting her face in dull blue. Jace's message was there still. "I want to see you again." She stared at it, thumb hovering over reply, then met my gaze, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know why I did it," she whispered. "I don't know why it got out of hand." I swallowed the anger and exhaustion that rattled my bones and took a step back. "Sometimes people stray when they realize what they had was taken for granted," I said. "Maybe that's what happened." She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. "Can we talk about this?" "Please talk to me." "I talked," I replied. "And you didn't listen." The silence that followed was thick, filled with the debris of broken promises and unspoken regrets. I turned away, walking back to the kitchen to finish my coffee. She remained in the doorway, framed by the dim light, the dress in her hand like a silent question. I picked up the mug and took a long swallow, the bitterness settling in my chest as firmly as resolve. Behind me, I heard her phone buzz once more, but I no longer cared. I set the mug down and walked into the guest room, closing the door softly. In the quiet, I let the weight of choice settle around me, and for the first time, I felt the strange, exhilarating tingle of freedom. I woke that morning to the unfamiliar sight of my suitcase standing open in the guest room, clothes spilling onto the floor like memories I no longer wanted to fold away neatly. The sky outside was a slate gray, low clouds pressing against the windows. As I blinked the sleep from my eyes, I realized how sleepy I had become. Not from late nights or exhaustion, but from the slow erasure of my own voice. Over the past week, I hadn't argued, hadn't pleaded, hadn't sought her attention. I'd simply begun to disappear. It started with small things. I stopped asking where she was going in the mornings. Instead of checking in before lunch, I let the phone ring unanswered and silenced the missed calls. When she texted, "I'm grabbing coffee with Aaron, I'll be late," I read it, tucked the phone in my pocket, and walked out the door. No response. No guilt. At first, it felt like an experiment, testing whether my absence would be noticed. But the apartment grew quieter, the corners less crowded by her presence and expectations. I spent mornings at the gym, the clatter of weights and the whir of treadmills a welcome contrast to the hollow hush at home. I counted repetitions until the burn in my muscles overtook the ache in my chest, then showered in the communal locker room, letting the spray mask the tears I no longer shed. Work became my refuge. I buried myself in projects and deadlines, losing hours in spreadsheets and client calls. My colleagues noticed I was more focused, less distracted by personal matters. They complimented my productivity, oblivious to the fact that I was channeling my heartbreak into something tangible: emails sent, presentations delivered, ideas pitched with renewed vigor. Each success reminded me I still existed beyond her orbit. Afternoons found me at the coffee shop down the street, nursing a single latte for hours while reading a novel I had long intended to finish. The baristas greeted me by name but didn't pry. I liked that. I liked the anonymity of the rows of mismatched tables and the hum of conversation that didn't involve me. There, I read about distant worlds rather than rehearse the scenes playing out in my own life. It was on my third visit that I noticed the guest room key lying on the kitchen counter, near her car keys and a single glove from a pair I had lost months ago. She must have been searching for it. But she didn't call me or ask where it was. She simply left it there, as if the division of our home was now a fact, not a fracture. I picked it up, weighed it in my hand, then placed it in my pocket. That evening, I moved my few belongings out of the master bedroom and into the guest room for good. The mattress there was thinner, the pillows flatter, but I welcomed the sterility. The master bedroom had once been our sanctuary. Now, it was a shrine to empty promises. I pressed my palms against the wall and let my forehead rest against it for a moment, imagining the space between us as a chasm widening by the second. She walked into the guest room later that night, phone in hand and eyes searching. I was folding a shirt in careful, precise folds, as though the act itself would stitch me back together. She paused in the doorway, then stepped in, watching me with an inscrutable expression. "Why did you move in here?" she asked, voice steady but tinged with hurt. I didn't look up. Better lighting for reading. Her eyes flickered, but she said nothing more. She laid a hand on the dresser and drew a slow circle, as though tracing the ghost of my presence. I folded the last shirt and placed it in the drawer, then shut it with a deliberate click. "Can we talk?" she whispered. I set my jaw. "I don't have anything left to say." She backed away, shoulders slumped. "You're shutting me out." I met her gaze then, felt the vulnerability in her voice, but my resolve held firm. "I'm not shutting you out. I'm stepping back." She shook her head, tears glinting. "That's the same thing." I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the narrow room that had become mine by default. I went to the living room, where the couch sagged in the middle, a testament to late-night conversations that had ceased. I sank into it, phone buzzing softly with new work messages, emails about deadlines, client approvals. I ignored them all, letting the silence envelop me. Over the next weeks, my schedule filled with routines that excluded her. I found a yoga class that met at dawn, stretching in silence as candles flickered against mirrored walls. I joined a painting workshop on Saturday afternoons, fingertips smeared with acrylics, creating landscapes that had nothing to do with the turmoil inside me. I even volunteered at a local shelter one evening a week, distributing meals to people who hadn't asked for much beyond kindness. In each space, I carved out pieces of myself that I had forgotten existed: an artist, a helper, a man who could find peace in solitude. She invited me to brunch one Sunday, texting, "Please just come for one meal." I read it over coffee in the courtyard of my new favorite cafe, the scent of jasmine drifting around me. I tapped decline without hesitation. I wasn't angry. I was resolved. Declining felt like an affirmation of my worth. One evening, I returned home to find the fridge nearly empty. She had taken her groceries with her, leaving only a carton of milk and a jar of peanut butter. I opened the fridge door and felt a pang of something like regret, but I shrugged and ordered takeout. As I ate sushi in the living room, I realized I no longer waited for her to ask if I needed anything. I could take care of myself. Then came the night she arranged her friends to visit for dinner. The dining table was set with candles and fine china, laughter filtering through the walls as I passed by on my way to the gym. They were too busy to notice me at the door, too enthralled by their own camaraderie to invite me in. I walked past without slowing, gym bag slung over my shoulder, and felt a satisfaction at no longer seeking approval. A month from the party, I found an apartment listing online, a small place, 1 bedroom, with a balcony overlooking a grove of oak trees. I considered calling and arranging a viewing, imagining the boxes I would pack, the paint I would choose for the walls. But I paused. Was I running towards something or simply fleeing? I closed the site and walked away, deciding that home was not an address but a state of mind, that I could rebuild even within these walls if I chose. When I told her about the listing, she frowned as though I were planning a permanent departure. "You don't have to move," she said. "We can figure this out." I looked at her, her hair pulled back, tired eyes reflecting worry, and saw the woman I had once adored. But I also saw the one who had dismissed me at the guest list, who treated my feelings as negotiable add-ons. I loved her still, but I loved myself more. "I'm not moving right now," I said, "but I'm building something here." Tears glistened, but she nodded slowly. "Okay." I watched her turn and leave the room. For the first time, neither of us asked for an explanation. The silence between us was no longer a battleground but a blank canvas, vast, daunting, and alive with possibility. In that silence, I discovered a truth I couldn't ignore. I was not fading away. I was reemerging. The slow disappearance wasn't about losing myself. It was about shedding who I had been to become who I needed to be. And as I lay in the guest room that night, the mattress unfamiliar beneath me, I felt more at home than I had in months. My boundaries, once blurred, stood clear. My heart, once tethered to her whims, beat steadily in my chest. I was still here. Only now, I belonged to myself. The invitation arrived in my inbox like a summons I couldn't, or wouldn't, ignore. Dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one with the bronze bar stools and low-lit booths where we'd spent countless anniversaries and long conversations. The subject line read simply, "One last dinner?" I stared at it, thumb hovering over delete for a full minute before opening it. The message itself was brief. "Let's talk. Wednesday, 7 p.m. same place." No apology, no explanation, just an olive branch tossed across a table we'd both abandoned. I closed my laptop and ran a hand through my hair, the fatigue of weeks of rebuilding myself pressing in. My walls had grown higher since the party, boundaries I had erected to protect my heart. But I found myself typing a reply before I'd fully thought it through. "Okay." I hit send and sat back, the click echoing like a starting gun. I wasn't sure what to expect: remorse, defensiveness, tears, or another demand for things on my terms. All I knew was that I needed closure more than confrontation. Wednesday arrived with a chill in the air, leaves tumbling down the street in swirling eddies. I dressed carefully. Dark jeans, a crisp charcoal shirt, the watch my grandfather had given me on my wedding day. I paused a moment to look in the mirror and took a steadying breath. I'd rehearsed what I wanted to say, but life rarely followed rehearsal. I slid on my jacket and stepped into the night, the city lights guiding me toward a reckoning I had both dreaded and craved. The restaurant was warm when I arrived, the scent of charred rosemary and garlic welcoming me. I spotted her immediately, seated in our usual booth, hands wrapped around a stemmed glass, eyes downturned, as though she were rehearsing words before speaking them aloud. Her hair was pulled back, and the soft lamplight traced the curve of her cheek. She looked fragile, smaller than I remembered. I swallowed and walked to the table. She looked up then, eyes widening with surprise that flickered into relief. "You came," she said quietly. Her voice had lost its earlier confidence, replaced by a tremor that spoke of vulnerability. I offered a nod and pulled out the chair opposite her. I sat, smoothing the fabric of my shirt beneath me. A server appeared, and I ordered water. She asked for herbal tea. We declined appetizers. Neither of us was hungry. The initial silence felt fragile, like a thread that could snap at any moment. She set her glass down and folded her hands on the table. "Thank you for coming," she began. "I know you probably have 100 reasons not to." "I have one reason," I replied. "Because we owe each other this conversation." Her lips curved in a tentative smile. "You're always practical." She paused, searching my face. "I'm sorry." I felt the apology weigh in the space between us. She said it plainly. No qualifiers, no justifications. For what? I asked. For everything, she answered, voice barely above a whisper. For making you feel like you had to compete for a place in my life. For inviting Jace and Bryant. For not seeing how much I was hurting you. For all the little ways I dismissed you. Her confession thawed something cold in my chest. I leaned forward, letting the warmth of her admission fill the gaps. Thank you, I said gently. But sorry alone can't fix years of neglect. Her eyes glistened. I know. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I thought I could have it all. My past, my friends, and you. I thought you'd understand. You always did. I closed my eyes briefly, memories flashing of laughter shared over cheap wine, of her head resting on my shoulder during late-night drives, of promises whispered beneath trembling stars. Understanding is a two-way street, I said. I tried to explain how it hurt me, but you asked me to silence my pain. You asked me to be fine. A tear slipped down her cheek. I thought you were fine. There were times I pretended, I admitted, voice soft. I smiled at the right moments. I laughed when everyone else laughed. But inside, I was breaking. She wiped her cheek with her napkin. I didn't notice. You didn't look, I corrected gently. You saw what you wanted to see. Her breath trembled. I see it now. She exhaled slowly, as though releasing breath held for years. When you said you wanted out, it shocked me. I realized how far I'd pushed you. I thought marriage meant you'd stay, no matter what. I picked up my water and took a sip, letting the coolness steady me. Commitment isn't permission to disregard someone's feelings. She nodded, tears pooling in her eyes now. I know. I thought love meant overlooking flaws, but I see now it means honoring each other's needs. I set the glass down. Then tell me why you invited them. Her shoulders dropped. I was scared. Turning 40 felt like losing my youth, and they reminded me of who I used to be, free, desired. I convinced myself I could recapture that with old flames, but I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. The honesty of her answer stung, but it also cleared the fog. You used nostalgia as an excuse to avoid the real problems in our marriage. Her nod was almost imperceptible. I was running from responsibility. I thought I could still have fun without consequences. And I was left cleaning up the consequences, I said. I lost my trust in you. Her fingertips traced the rim of her teacup. You have every right to. I took a deep breath. So what now? She swallowed, eyes bright with tears and hope. I want to try again, she said. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, boundaries, open communication, whatever you need. I studied her face, noting the earnestness there. The woman who sat across from me was not the same one who had cavalierly discarded my feelings. She seemed humbled, aware of the damage she had caused. But I was not the same either. I had spent weeks rebuilding my life, discovering I could stand on my own. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But I've changed too. I've learned I deserve someone who sees me without conditions. She nodded, a tear tracing down her cheek. I see you. I rested my hand on hers, softly. Thank you. Her gaze dropped to her joined hands, then lifted again. Can we start over? I paused. The question was both invitation and risk. I could stand to reclaim what we had lost, if she truly understood and respected the man I was becoming. But I could also choose to walk away for good, preserving the peace I'd found in solitude. I withdrew my hand gently and set it beside my glass. I can't go back to who I was, I said. And you can't go back to who you were. Her lips quivered. But we can build something new? I considered her, the raw sincerity in her eyes, and the freedom I now felt in claiming my own worth. Maybe, I replied, but only if it's a relationship of equals, where I never have to compete for your respect or your affection again. She nodded slowly, relief and determination mingling in her expression. Agreed. We sat there in the soft glow of the restaurant, two people at a crossroads. The dishes remained untouched. The words we exchanged carried more weight than any meal could. Around us, other diners chatted and laughed, unaware of the fragile pact being forged in the hush between courses. When the server finally approached, I waved her away with a small smile. We didn't need dessert to mark an ending or a beginning. The real course lay in what came next, whether we would choose the safer path of parting ways or the uncertain road of rebuilding together. I reached across the table, this time offering a handshake instead of an embrace. She took it, her hand warm and steady. To new beginnings, she said softly. I nodded, returning the grip firmly. To new beginnings. And in that moment, I realized that endings and beginnings were woven together, indistinguishable strands in the fabric of our lives. Whether we walked separate paths or walked them side by side, I would carry the lesson with me, that true respect is never optional, and that some doors close so that better ones can open. After the divorce was finalized, a curious echo of my life reverberated through unexpected channels. Friendships I thought stable shifted subtly. Some reached out to offer support, others quietly retreated. But most striking were the messages from Kira's circle. Friends who once seemed indifferent to my presence now confessed regrets I was only beginning to process. Lorelei was the first. Her message arrived one morning when sunlight streamed through my living room windows, dust motes dancing in the glow. "I need to tell you how sorry we all are," she wrote. "We watched you shrink while she shone, and we did nothing." Her words reverberated in my mind as I scrolled through the echo chamber of texts and emails that followed. There was Marisol, a bridesmaid at our wedding, who admitted she had laughed at jokes made at my expense because she didn't know how else to respond. There was Avery, who confessed she had seen the way Kira's smile shifted too easily toward her exes and had chosen loyalty to a friend over truth. Each confession felt like peeling away layers of my own doubt, revealing wounds I hadn't realized festered from every casual slight and every whispered punchline at my expense. Their apologies were heartfelt, composed in the vulnerability I had only allowed myself weeks earlier. I read each message over coffee in the mornings, the words stirring empathy for people who had been complicit in her disregard, but who now acknowledged my pain. Some offered tangible gestures, a dinner invitation, a coffee meetup, while others simply needed to unload the guilt they carried. I accepted a brunch invitation from Marisol, and in that bright cafe tucked away from our old neighborhood, we spoke without pretense. She listened as I described the slow unraveling of my marriage, tears glistening in her eyes. When I finished, she reached across the table, squeezing my hand with quiet remorse. Yet amid these reconciliations, I recognized that forgiveness is a gift as much for the forgiver as for the forgiven. Each conversation allowed me to understand what had been invisible to me at the time. Kira's behavior did not exist in isolation. Her charm had hidden fractures in her social circle, and many had turned a blind eye rather than confront awkward truths. In acknowledging my own worth, I realized they were acknowledging theirs, choosing integrity over comfort, even belatedly. One evening, Lorelei called. We met at a park bench beneath an oak tree, its leaves rustling overhead in a gentle breeze. She was apologetic yet relieved, as though admitting fault had lifted a weight from her shoulders. "She told me she thought you'd forgive like always," Lorelei said, voice trembling. "She thought you'd never leave." I nodded, remembering the bitterness I tasted when I discovered how easily Kira had assumed my compliance. "Sometimes people don't believe you can walk away," I said quietly. "Until you do." Lorelei wiped a tear from her cheek. She cried for months, she confessed. Real tears. She told me she realized too late what she'd lost. I observed the careful tilt of her head, the way her voice caught on certain words. Even in her vulnerability, a defense lingered, protecting Kira, softening her culpability. But I sensed genuine regret too, and I allowed myself a measure of compassion. "I'm glad she feels remorse," I said, "but I'm not the same person I was." That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling buoyant and unexpectedly grounded. I poured myself a glass of wine and sank into the armchair by the window, surveying the life I had reclaimed. I thought of the messages from Kira's friends, the whispered confessions, the tearful apologies, and realized that my journey toward healing had rippled outward, prompting others to confront uncomfortable truths. Their remorse was not a balm for my broken marriage, but it was a reminder that integrity can flourish even in the aftermath of betrayal. Days passed, and the outreach continued. Handwritten notes slipped under my door, late-night calls from acquaintances seeking closure for themselves. Invitations to gatherings where I was no longer an accessory to Kira's narrative but an individual recognized and respected. With each encounter, I became more certain that the life I was building deserved honest connections. I declined one dinner invitation from a mutual friend who still seemed reluctant to face the past. I accepted another from someone who apologized for never believing I would leave. In these choices, I discovered a freedom I had long denied myself, the freedom to curate my own community, grounded in sincerity rather than convenience. By the end of that week, a subtle transformation had settled within me. Letters from her friends had closed a chapter of misunderstanding, and in their place rose a chapter defined by authenticity. I placed the final apology letter, Lorelei's note, penned in purple ink, into a keepsake box alongside the invitation to her dinner party that had introduced me to Elise. The box felt weighty, full of reminders not of what I had lost, but of what I had gained: clarity, respect, and the reaffirmation that walking away was sometimes the most honest act of love for oneself and for those who remained worthy of one's trust. In the quiet that followed, I understood that healing was not a solitary act. It involved others reaching across the chasms they had helped dig, acknowledging the pain they had seen but chosen to ignore. Their letters, their messages, their tears, they were not requited with immediate forgiveness, but with recognition of shared humanity. And in that recognition, I found the strength to continue forging a new path. One guided not by the shadows of my past, but by the light of my own self-respect. 3 years slipped by like pages in a well-worn book, each day marked by brushstrokes rather than heartbreak. I settled into Portland with the ease of someone who had learned to carry solitude without fear. My mornings began with the drizzle that defined the city, the steady patter on pavement, a kind of lullaby that coaxed me out of bed. I brewed coffee in a French press, the rich aroma mingling with the scent of eucalyptus from the shower steam. Over a simple breakfast of toast and jam, I mapped out the day: studio time, errands, grading art assignments, and sometimes a quiet walk along the Willamette River. My apartment was small, its windows looking out onto a courtyard where ivy crept along brick walls. I had painted the living room a soft sage green, in homage to the forest that framed the city. Canvases leaned against the walls, their subjects ranging from misty landscapes to abstract explorations of light and shadow. I spent hours in that space, palette in hand, letting emotion guide the swirl of colors. Painting was less a creative choice than a necessity. It grounded me, reminded me that I could shape something beautiful from broken pieces. By afternoon, I would make my way to the community arts center where I taught a weekly class. My students varied in age and ability: retirees discovering a late passion, young professionals hungry for a creative outlet, teenagers with raw talent and restless energy. I encouraged them to embrace mistakes as part of the process, to let go of perfection in favor of authentic expression. Their progress became my reward. When one of them mastered a difficult technique or unveiled a piece that surprised even themselves, I felt a quiet thrill, proof that growth, however slow, was always possible. It was Tilda who crystallized my own transformation. She was a regular, a woman in her 30s with keen eyes and a steady hand. One evening after class, as I helped her mix a custom shade of burnt sienna, she looked up and said, "You look like someone who's seen love and decided peace was better." Her observation stopped me in mid-stroke. I turned, paintbrush suspended in air, and studied her gentle expression. "That's accurate," I replied, surprising myself with the candor. She smiled, her eyes reflecting more curiosity than judgment. "There's a lightness about you now. It wasn't there before." I set the brush down and folded my arms. I traded weight against my spirit for weight in my art. Some exchanges are worth making. Her nod was thoughtful, and she returned to her canvas, but I carried her words with me long after the studio lights dimmed. I realized she was right. I had learned that peace was not a passive state, but a deliberate choice. To release bitterness, to cultivate self-respect, to welcome new experiences without the burden of old wounds. Life was comfortable in its routine. I volunteered at a weekend market selling prints of my paintings, chatted with strangers who admired the landscapes I had conjured from memory, and sometimes traded stories with fellow artists in a cozy cafe where the barista knew my order by heart. On Sundays, I explored thrift stores for vintage frames and oddball inspiration, a chipped teacup that became part of a still life, a weathered book cover that influenced a palette choice. I built a life that felt wholly my own, stitched together from simple pleasures and creative pursuits. Then came that rainy Thursday, the kind of day where umbrellas bloom like colorful mushrooms on the sidewalk. I was grading a stack of watercolor studies when my phone pinged with an email notification. The subject line was so plain it took me a moment to register it. "Can we talk?" From Kira. My heart skipped, the old familiar twist of anticipation and dread knotting in my chest. I set aside the papers and stared at the screen, watching the cursor blink as if urging me to open the message. My thumb hovered over the preview, but I hesitated. What did she want after all this time? Was it confession, apology, or something more? I tapped to open. The body of the email was brief. "Hi. I know it's been a long time. I hope you're well. There isn't an easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. I made so many mistakes, and I've had years to think about what I lost. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want to understand what happened to hear it from you. If you're willing, can we meet? I'll travel to Portland, or we can find a neutral place. I owe you that. I sat back in my chair, the email floating before me like a message in a bottle washed ashore after a storm. My mind raced through memories, our laughter in warmer days, the abrupt end, the slow unraveling of promises. I could feel the echo of my old pain, but it was softer now, cushioned by time and healing. I closed the laptop and stood, pushing my chair back against the desk. In the window's reflection, I saw my own face, calm eyes set in a stronger jawline, a man remade by decisions he had once feared to make. I brought a hand to my chest, feeling the steady beat beneath my shirt. Peace, I reminded myself, was a choice. What I would choose next remained unwritten. I walked to the easel, fingers grazing the wet paint on a canvas I had yet to title. The rain drummed on the glass above me, a steady rhythm that whispered of renewal. I imagined a scene without her, the promise of blank space waiting for brush and color. And then I imagined a conversation, a chance to speak truths that had been buried under echoes of what if. I picked up my palette, mixing a careful shade of gray for the sky I planned to paint. The world beyond the studio was wet and blurred, but inside, possibilities stretched as far as my imagination. Whether I would meet her or let the email dissolve into the silence I had come to cherish, I did not yet know. But in that moment, I understood that time had humbled us both, and that the next stroke on my canvas would be mine to choose. I arrived at the bookstore cafe 10 minutes early, heart thundering in my chest, as though I were about to step onto a stage for the first time. The scent of aged paper and fresh espresso mingled in the air, an odd comfort against the tremor in my hands. I chose a small table by the window, the one with two mismatched chairs tucked under its wooden surface. I drummed my fingers against the tabletop, reminding myself this was no longer about rekindling anything, only hearing her out on neutral ground. When Kira walked in, she looked smaller than I remembered. The years had etched subtle lines around her eyes, and her hair was cut short, the ends brushing her collar. She paused when she saw me, hesitation flickering across her features before she offered a tentative smile. I stood to greet her, nodding once, then gesturing to the chair opposite me. She sat, placing her handbag on her lap, and for a moment we both stared at two steaming cups of coffee set before us by a passing barista. I studied her face, its familiar contours softened by distance, and wondered why we had let things unravel so completely. She folded her hands in front of her, the knuckles paling as she braced herself. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, voice low but clear. "I know you didn't have to." "I came," I replied evenly, "because you asked." The words felt heavier than I expected, as though I were forging a path through old grief. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I meant what I said in the email. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just need to understand." I leaned back, stirring my coffee absently, the spoon clinking against ceramic. "Understand what?" I asked. "How everything ended," she said, exhaling slowly. "Why you walked away so suddenly." I replay the moment in my head all the time. She sipped her coffee and set the cup down. "I still don't fully get it." I took a steadying breath, recalling the tangled mess of betrayal and ego that had driven me from our home. "We talked," I began, choosing my words with care. "You apologized. You asked to try again. But the thing is, you didn't change." Her forehead creased. "I thought I did. You asked me to start over, but on your terms." I paused, letting the steam rise between us. "You wanted commitment without accountability. You wanted us to pretend the past didn't exist." She pressed her lips together, nodding slowly. "I see that now." I held her gaze for a moment, then looked away at the rain beginning to splatter the window pane. "That morning, you told me you missed the way I made you feel seen. It hurt, because I did see you. You just never looked back." A tear rolled down her cheek as she stared at the table. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought I was giving you space." "You gave me space to fade," I said quietly. "I stopped asking questions. You stopped explaining. And between those silences, we died." She shook her head, the weight of realization settling in. "I don't know how to fix it now." I reached across and lifted her hand, the gesture gentle but firm. Her skin was cool under my palm. "You can't fix the past," I said. "You can only be different going forward." She inhaled shakily. "Is that possible?" I considered the question. We had both changed, her through regret, me through rebuilding my life. "Not for us," I said softly. "Not this way." Her lips trembled as she withdrew her hand. "I understand." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the quiet murmur of the cafe and the hiss of the espresso machine. I realized I had ached for this moment, not to reconcile, but to speak the truth I had carried alone for so long. When the barista refilled my cup, I nodded in thanks and took a sip, the bitter warmth steadying my thoughts. Kira watched me with eyes full of sorrow and acceptance. I imagined the years of what-ifs that had played through her mind since our last encounter and felt a compassion I hadn't expected. "I'm glad you reached out," I said after a moment. She blinked, a glimmer of hope flashing through her grief. "Me too," she whispered. I set my cup down and slid out of the chair. She rose with me, both of us awkward in the hush of finality. I clasped her hand in a brief, firm grip, then let go. "I wish you well, Kira," I said. She nodded, brushing a tear from her cheek. "And you," she replied. I turned toward the door, the click of my shoes against the hardwood floor echoing in the empty space of what was once ours. Outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle. I stepped into the wet afternoon air, water droplets beating on my jacket. I looked back through the window. She was still standing there, hands clasped, watching me walk away. In that moment, I felt neither triumph nor regret, only a quiet certainty that our story had reached its true end. I hadn't needed this coffee to change anything, only to confirm that moving on was the only path to keep living as the person I had become. And with each step down the street, I felt the tightness in my chest loosen, replaced by the steady pulse of freedom. When the invitation arrived, it was simple and unadorned, a text from Lorelei, asking me to join a small dinner gathering at her home in 2 weeks. No mention of Kira, no underlying agenda. It was pitched as a cozy evening among friends, and I sensed genuine enthusiasm in her words. I paused before replying, imagining the last time I'd felt included in a social circle untainted by past dramas. My life had grown quieter, and I'd grown accustomed to solitude, but something in Lorelei's tone stirred curiosity in me. I let the invitation sink in for a moment, then texted back, "I'd love to come," surprising myself with how readily the words formed. The days that followed were an exercise in anticipation. I found myself looking forward to the evening with a mixture of hope and apprehension. I wondered who else would be there, what conversations would unfold, and whether the night would feel like stepping into a new chapter or merely revisiting old pages. I spent the afternoon before the dinner selecting my outfit, a dark shirt and well-fitted jeans, taking extra care with my appearance in a way I hadn't in years. The mirror reflected a man transformed, calmer eyes, a steady jaw, shoulders held with quiet confidence. On the night of the dinner, I drove through winding streets lined with flowering cherry trees, their blossoms brushing softly against the windshield. Lorelei's neighborhood was warm and inviting, with amber streetlights casting long shadows on the sidewalks. I parked and walked to her front door, nerves fluttering lightly in my chest. When she opened the door, her smile was bright, and she greeted me with a hug that felt like genuine welcome rather than obligation. Behind her, I glimpsed the cozy glow of lamps, the clink of glassware, and the hum of relaxed conversation. Inside, the dining room was intimate, a long wooden table set with simple place settings, mismatched chairs, and a centerpiece of fresh wildflowers. A fireplace crackled in the corner, sending tendrils of warmth into the room. A handful of Lorelei's friends sat chatting, their voices low and friendly. Faces I recognized: Marisol, helping herself to a plate of roasted vegetables, Avery, pouring wine with an easy smile. And then there was Elise, the woman Lorelei had told me about, sitting across from Marisol with an animated expression as she spoke. Elise caught my eye and stood, extending a hand in greeting. She was slender, with warm brown eyes and a gentle grace in her movements. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her voice soft but confident. I shook her hand, feeling at ease under her steady gaze. "Thank you for having me," I replied, smiling genuinely for the first time that evening. Lorelei made the introductions complete, and then we all took our seats. The meal began with a shared appetizer, a rustic spread of cheeses, olives, and crusty bread, and conversation flowed easily around the table. It surprised me how natural it felt to be included, how little residual tension hung in the air. Lorelei kept the tone light, asking gentle questions about my painting workshops and life in Portland, and each response I gave sparked genuine interest. At one point, Marisol raised her glass. "To new chapters," she toasted, and everyone echoed the sentiment. I lifted my wine and met Lorelei's eyes, grateful for the gesture. The food that followed was simple but delicious, a vegetable lasagna that smelled of fresh basil, a salad tossed with lemon vinaigrette, and roasted potatoes seasoned with rosemary. Each bite tasted like community, a reminder of shared plates and easy laughter I'd once taken for granted. Conversation drifted toward travels, favorite books, and weekend plans. Each person contributed stories with warmth, listening attentively when others spoke. I realized I'd been starved for this. Companionship unclouded by betrayal or obligation. I shared anecdotes about leading my art classes, and they peppered me with questions, genuinely engaged. When the topic of heartbreak surfaced, I offered a wry smile and said, "I've painted more canvases than I've counted, each one a lesson in letting go." They nodded in understanding, sharing their own tales of loss and resilience. Elise leaned forward, curious. "What was your turning point?" she asked. "When did you decide to choose peace over pain?" I paused, taking a moment to reflect. "It wasn't a single day," I began. "It was a series of quiet decisions. Every morning, I chose my own worth over someone else's approval. I spoke of declining brunch invitations, of reclaiming my space, of finding solace in painting." She listened with rapt attention, her expression open and encouraging. After dinner, we moved to the living room, where Lorelei had set up board games and a small bar cart. The fire crackled, and cushions were scattered on the rug. We played a few rounds of a word game, laughter erupting as we fumbled over letters and made absurd definitions. When someone suggested a final toast, Elise poured sparkling water into everyone's glasses. "To new friendships," she declared, "and to writing the best chapters yet." I raised my glass, feeling warmth flood my chest that had nothing to do with the wine. "To new friendships," I echoed. And in that moment, I realized this night wasn't about replacing what I had lost. It was about discovering what I could gain when I stopped pretending the past defined my future. Later, as the evening wound down, Lorelei walked me to the door. She gave me a quick hug and whispered, "You belong here." I stepped outside into the cool night, the scent of blossoms in the air. I paused, looking back at the warmly lit windows, and felt a profound gratitude for the invitation. Not because I needed to be rescued, but because I had been welcomed as I was, complete and whole, unburdened by old narratives. Driving home, I thought of the dinners yet to come, the friendships yet to deepen. The city lights blurred past, and I felt excitement ripple through me. Sometimes healing starts when you realize the story you thought was over wasn't even the best chapter. And as I navigated the familiar streets toward my apartment, I knew I had finally found my place in the story I was writing, a chapter rich with hope, honest connections, and the promise of new beginnings. Months had passed since the dinner at Lorelei's, months of quiet routines and growing confidence in the life I had carved out for myself. I had settled into a comfortable rhythm of mornings spent in the studio, afternoons teaching art, and evenings curled with a book or exploring Portland's vibrant streets. The echoes of my past relationship had grown fainter, more distant, until one evening my phone buzzed with a notification that pulled me back through time. I paused on the threshold of my front door, keys in hand, and saw Kira's name blinking on the screen. It wasn't a text message but a voice note, a medium she had chosen perhaps because words felt inadequate typed on a glass rectangle. I hesitated, heart stirring with a familiar tug of anticipation mixed with dread. I could almost hear the tremor in my voice before I pressed play, but I resisted. I stood in the quiet hallway, listening to the soft hum of my refrigerator and the distant murmur of traffic, and wondered if I wanted to hear what she had to say. My thumb hovered over the message, its duration displayed in tiny numerals. 0:34. 34 seconds. Long enough to fill with apologies or excuses, long enough to reopen wounds I had spent years tending so carefully. I recalled the nights I had lain awake replaying old conversations, the mornings when her absence felt like an absence of air, the afternoons when I had to remind myself that my own heartbeat mattered more than hers. In that moment, I realized that some doors, once closed, must remain closed, not out of spite but out of preservation. I slid the phone into my pocket and stepped into the living room. My gaze fell on the stack of canvases leaning against the far wall, each splash of color a testament to mornings when I rose without regret, afternoons when I lost myself in brush strokes, evenings when I fell into sleep untroubled by conflict. The apartment felt like a sanctuary, a place where my worth was not measured by someone else's whims. I set the keys on the console table and sank into the armchair, the familiar fabric welcoming me like an old friend. The phone buzzed again, another reminder that the message still waited, wanting release. In the dim light of the living room lamp, I pictured her recording the note, the slight catch in her throat, the careful choice of words, the vulnerability she had once hidden behind laughter and social gatherings. I thought of her standing at the doorway of my life, knocking gently after all the storms we had weathered. I thought of the apology she might offer, the regret she would voice, the hope she might cling to. But I also thought of the man I had become, someone who valued peace over pretense and silence over performative closure. I rose and walked to the small writing desk by the window. Sunlight had given way to the glow of streetlights and neon signs, the city breathing a soft lullaby beyond the glass. I retrieved my journal, the one I used to capture fleeting ideas and reflections, and placed it open on the desk. My pen hovered over the blank page. I could transcribe her words, could unpack them line by line, could let them guide me into a reconciliation that might never be mutual. But I paused, acknowledging that sometimes the truest response was no response at all. My fingers swiped across the screen, highlighting the voice note. Without a second thought, I deleted it. The confirmation pop-up asked, "Delete this message," and I tapped yes. The file vanished, freeing up space in my memory and mind. I closed my eyes and felt a lightness, as though a weight I hadn't noticed was lifted from my chest. It wasn't malice that guided my action, but mercy for both of us. Mercy for her to move past the pain she carried. Mercy for me to preserve the sanctuary I had built. In the aftermath of the deletion, I leaned back in the chair and let my mind settle into the gentle cadence of my own breathing. I reflected on the journey from that first chapter. Organizing her 40th birthday, watching her laugh between old flames, discovering my own worth in her absence, to all the chapters that followed, the party I skipped, the months I spent disappearing, the final dinner that laid our truths bare, the friendships that unearthed apologies, and the nights I reclaimed my identity through art and solitude. Each chapter had been a lesson in boundaries and self-respect, an understanding that love sometimes requires releasing someone entirely. I reached for the journal and wrote a single line. "She lost me at the guest list." I paused, then added quietly in the margin, "and I never RSVP'd again." The pen felt weighty in my hand, the ink a tangible record of my decision. In writing those words, I affirmed that some farewells need no ceremony, no conversation, no mutual closure, only the steadfast choice to live fully without looking back. Pulling the journal close, I closed my eyes and let a gentle smile touch my lips. The hum of the city drifted through the window, a reminder that life moved forward, indifferent to our individual dramas. Tomorrow, I would wake and paint new canvases, lead another art class, meet friends for coffee, and perhaps watch the rain as it painted patterns on the window. The deletion of a single voice note would not define my day. It would simply be the quiet punctuation to a story I had already rewritten with my own voice. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out. The street lamps cast long, soft shadows on the pavement, and the city lights twinkled like distant stars. I exhaled slowly, feeling peace settle around me like a familiar blanket. In that serene moment, I understood that closure was not a conversation but an acceptance, and sometimes the kindest reply was silence. With that thought, I turned away from the window and carried my journal to the small shelf beside my bed. I placed it there, tucked in between a stack of art books and a potted succulent that thrived on neglect. As I slid into bed, I felt complete, no longer tethered to her voice, no longer entangled in old narratives, free to chart the next chapter on my own terms. And in the quiet darkness before sleep claimed me, I drifted with the comforting knowledge that some stories end not with grand declarations, but with a simple sent button left unpushed, a conversation left unhad, and a life embraced in all its imperfect, unbroken beauty.